Did everybody?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome.
Good morning.
As folks are arriving here, I want to be the first to warmly welcome all of you. And as you arrive, we're just going to encourage everyone to remember to leave yourself muted. And we really encourage you to have your video on so we can look around the virtual room and see all the friendly faces that are with us today. So keep your audio muted and keep your video on as you arrive. Welcome to everyone. We're so glad to have you with us. We'll wait a couple more seconds as folks join us from all around the virtual rooms, and we will be getting started in just a moment. If you haven't already and you want to update the name on your computer screen, reminder that you can hover over your own photo and click on the box that has the three little dots. And we're encouraging everyone to add a comma after your name and then let us know the city and the state that you're in. So after your name, include your home community and the state that you're in. So welcome everyone. As folks are all joining, we're so glad that you're here. My name is Aaron McMurray. I'm Chief Strategy Officer for Innovia Foundation, and I want to be the first to welcome you warmly to Innovia's 2021 Community Leadership Summit. We really are so excited to have all of you with us today. And while we wish we could be together in person, I'm confident that today's speakers and our roundtable discussions will inspire us, lift our collective spirits, and remind us of the power of collaboration and generosity in the work before us as community leaders, which is really what we are all about. And our theme for the Leadership Summit today is Reimagining Our Communities. We'll dive headlong into this theme, but we also know that we will just barely scratch the surface of all that we can learn together about ways to reimagine our communities. So as we move through today's Leadership Summit, please remember that over the next few months, and we'll be sharing more details as we progress through this, Innovia will be hosting a series of monthly discussions to take a deeper dive into the many ways we can ignite generosity and reimagine our communities together. So speaking of generosity, before I turn it over to Innovia's CEO, Shelley O'Quinn, I am honored to warmly thank our sponsors who have made the 2021 Leadership Summit possible. Our presenting sponsor is Numerical Credit Union, and a huge thank you to Carla Cicero, Pyramid Gilman, and Amanda Swan for their friendship and partnership and generosity. We also have several Leadership Summit sponsors, and we want to thank each of them: Baker Construction, Kimley and Haygood, and the University of Washington. And a big thank you to our friends Brooke Baker Spink and Barry Baker of Baker Construction, Gordon Hester of Kimley and Haygood, and Catherine Brazil of the University of Washington for making these sponsorships possible. And so while you're keeping yourselves muted, would everybody please give like an Arsenio Hall or a golfer's clap or a shout of appreciation for our sponsors. We're so grateful for each of them and for their generosity. Each of these organizations are so much more than just generous sponsors. They are friends, they're community partners, they're organizations that invest in the fabric of our community. And so we're really proud to have them as sponsors today. And at this time, I want to introduce Piermann Gilman, Senior Vice President for Corporate and Community Relations at Numerical Credit Union. In addition to Kim's leadership at Numerical, she's also an inspirational community leader and volunteer, and she's been a galvanizing leader of the End the Violence campaign to coalesce a community-wide effort to bring an end to domestic violence in our communities. So thank you, Kim, for all that you do in our community and for being with us today. I'm going to turn it over to Piermann Gilman with Numerical.
Thank you, Aaron. Good morning, everyone. Numerical is really proud to return as the presenting sponsor of this year's Leadership Summit. I don't know about you, but it seems like it was just yesterday that we were all gathered together in person at the historic Davenport Hotel for the 2020 summit. Maybe that's just because that was the last event I actually attended in person. And it's actually been 387 days. Not that I'm counting, but what a wild 387 days. Do you remember when Zoom happy hour was fun and fresh, or when we paused to soak in an event-free weekend for once? In all seriousness, though, those 387 days didn't just bring change. They brought an abundance of heartache for communities all around the globe, as well as our own. And those days also brought silver linings as we watched our communities show up like never before, lifting up others, rallying around our nonprofits and small businesses, and caring for our neighbors and friends. So here we are together again in a different capacity, but really with the same intent: to learn and work together to make our community stronger. Like last year's inaugural summit, Innovia Foundation has done a remarkable job in planning today's virtual summit. We are all in for a really great day. Thank you. Numerica's relationship with Innovia spans beyond this event, where we've partnered to make a collaborative impact on communities we serve. We've had the honor to contribute to efforts like Community Partners for Middle School Success Program, Opening Books, Opening Doors, a K-3 literacy program in the Coeur d'Alene School District, as well as supporting the Spokane Regional Domestic Violence Coalition's efforts to end the violence. Last year, that impact reached new heights as we collaborated with Innovia in really new ways. It was only a year ago that Shelley and the team approached us about investing in their COVID-19 relief efforts. We were honored to contribute $50,000 to Innovia as part of the All in Washington Relief Fund. Later in the same year, we revisited that fund and made an additional $36,000 gift to Innovia as part of the same program. The second time, we benefited Volunteers of America, an organization that has been fighting homelessness in Spokane for over 120 years. And that's where it really gets exciting. Because of Innovia's leadership and participation in the All in Washington program, that $36,000 and the $50,000 became match eligible, stretching our $86,000 gift to $172,000 of support locally. These 2020 donations will continue to provide direct services to those acutely affected by the ongoing crisis, even into this year. And you know what? That $36,000 gift to Volunteers of America was pretty special. For us, it was part of Numerica's 2020 year-end giving campaign called Home for the Holidays. In December, we donated a total of $100,000 to 4 homeless service agencies throughout Spokane, North Idaho, Tri-Cities, and Wenatchee. The intent: to move families and individuals out of temporary shelter and out of homelessness into safe, stable homes of their own. Of the 30 individuals benefited, 17 were youth. I could definitely go on and on about this incredible program, as well as our pride in calling Innovia Foundation a true partner. But our time together today is packed with excellent content. So instead, I'd love to wrap up by showing you a brief video of Home for the Holidays for the lives it touched and how the program went. On behalf of Numerica, thank you for being here today. Thank you to the speakers for sharing your knowledge, experience, and insights. And finally, huge thanks to Innovia for providing this opportunity for us all to come together for the betterment of our communities. Have a great day.
Warmth, stability, family, love.
Home is safety, support, happiness, love. That all feels like home to me.
A community is only as strong as its most vulnerable. And we know that many people are struggling right now, particularly those who are experiencing homelessness.
I didn't feel safe at all because being on the streets by yourself is one thing, but carrying a child is a totally different thing.
Numerica's commitment to enhancing lives, fulfilling dreams, and building communities means showing up when times are tough. This holiday season, Numerica is teaming up with homeless services organizations and donating $100,000 to help move families and individuals out of shelters and into homes.
I don't know if you recognize just how big of a deal it is to our clients, making sure that our clients get all the support that they need throughout the year, but especially around the holidays is super crucial.
Something, something to hold on to, like, well, I can do this,
Numerica's support during this whole process is is tremendous, to say the least.
I just want to say thank you, Numerica, to every single one of you. I mean, for the support and the encouragement that you're bringing these girls. It's bigger help than I think you guys will ever understand, and I'm so grateful.
Being told that someone is getting you somewhere to move in, and like, that's just like, wow.
Thank you, Kim, and a big thank you to Numerica Credit Union and all of our sponsors for making today possible. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 2021 Community Leadership Summit. My name is Shelley O'Quinn, and I am CEO of Innovia Foundation, and it is an honor to be with all of you today. This feels a little bit like Hollywood Squares, so thank you, but have hope. We are already making plans for our next Leadership Summit to be in person next year. Today, we're going to explore together some audacious dreams and goals for our region, and we fully acknowledge that we cannot do this work alone. The purpose of this Leadership Summit is to reimagine our communities together. So Innovia's vision is vibrant and sustainable communities where every person has the opportunity to thrive in every community across our region. And this will only happen with the friendships and partnerships with community leaders like all of you. Joining us today are many friends, donors, and trusted partners. So here is a quick poll to give us all an idea of who is in the room today. If you can click on the one that best represents you, since I know you wear many hats, we can just take a look at some of those results. And thank you for those of you who have put your city in your name, because we have representation from across our region. Look at that. It's still going. And hopefully you can all see the results on your screen. We have Leadership Council members, volunteers, donors, board members, community partners, and I would say all of you are friends. I want to take a moment to thank the members of Innovia's board who are with us today, as well as our emeriti. Your wisdom, guidance, leadership, and passion for the foundation are instrumental in directing us in the future. We are also joined by over 150 amazing volunteers, as you can see in those survey results, Leadership Council members, scholarship and board committee volunteers. You ground us in our communities and inform our work. Thank you to each of you for your service and leadership, as it's essential to what we do every day. Also with us are Innovia Foundation donors and fund founders. These are inspiring philanthropists who use their funds to invest in nonprofits and local communities to positively impact our region. And last, but definitely not least, many community and philanthropic partners have joined us. These are true rebuilders whose work aligns with ours. We cannot do this work alone, and we value the transformative power of partnerships because we believe that together we are greater. For those of you who are new to Innovia Foundation, we thank you for joining us to learn more. We hope that you will be inspired today and ignited to join our work. As I was reflecting on last year's Leadership Summit, I was reminded of Sam Radford, who you'll see today, asking each of us to think about where we were 10 years ago. And then he asked us to imagine, could we have imagined ourselves there today? And for the majority of us, we couldn't. And for me, oh, how those words have resonated this past year, because I know that at the beginning of March last year, when we last met, that I could not have imagined that we would be meeting virtually today for a 2-hour session versus a 2-day summit. And I want to acknowledge that we are here and that 2020 was a hard year for all of us in so many ways and for so many in our communities. But throughout this year, we were inspired by all of you because no matter how hard life gets, there is always beauty, resilience, and generosity in humankind. So I want to say a big thank you to KHQ for capturing last year's Leadership Summit and last year in the following video.
Innovia Foundation envisions vibrant and sustainable communities where every person has the opportunity to thrive. This is why in March of 2020, more than 200 Innovia Foundation volunteers and community partners gathered from around the region for 2 days of incredible speakers, engaging conversations, and regional relationship building.
We didn't look alike, we didn't have the same background, but we came with the same purpose of how to make our community better.
Coming together with other people who share your passion for your community. Let's share ideas. Let's sit down and tackle some of the tough problems together.
And our leadership councils came together, forging relationships which would set the stage for the year ahead, a year unlike any other we could imagine.
Little did we know that the Leadership Summit, which launched our leadership councils, would prove to be so critical in positioning us to serve our region.
One of the topics that came up as the challenges for the area was broadband access. And then right after that, we all went remote and the impact on students, and we really saw inequities come up when it came to broadband access.
The shared vision and trusted relationships created during those 2 days allowed us to come back together 2 weeks later when our region was shut down by COVID-19. Over the past 12 months, our volunteers have brought the voice of their communities to Innovia's work. Our leadership councils were crucial in lifting up community priorities and identifying organizations on the front lines who are best positioned to meet the needs of the people who are most impacted by the pandemic. Our success this past year is a direct result of the dedication and commitment of our volunteers who live in the communities that we serve. We could not have done this work without all of you.
In their first year, our leadership councils rose to the occasion and were instrumental in distributing more than $2.7 million in grants to 323 organizations, serving those most impacted by the outbreak.
Sometimes timing is everything. COVID-19 may have separated us, but it has also brought us together in ways we could never have imagined given our vast geography. At Innovia Foundation, we are grateful for the work we've done together with all of you. Our commitment to your community is stronger than ever. We will continue to bring community members together from across our 20 counties as a way to bring local expertise and knowledge in determining the greatest needs of our region.
It's a way for us to really have feet on the ground in those communities and make sure that the work we're wanting to do is actually what the community needs and what the community is asking for, and then what they can sustain.
Now that we've kind of got our legs under us, we can go forward and dream bigger. And we're ready to continue to roll up our sleeve and get the work done.
As we share time together now and in the future, looking forward to when we can meet again in person, we invite you to consider ways in which we can work together to ignite generosity in your world, in your towns, on your farms, in your homes, and in your workplace. We invite you to reimagine our communities with us. Let's dream big. I love that video. And I love Betsy's last comment where she said, let's dream bigger. Let's reimagine our communities with a vision of vibrant and sustainable communities where every person has the opportunity to thrive. Our theme for this year, if you haven't picked up on it, is reimagining our communities, not just post-COVID, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and beyond. But what does reimagining our communities actually look like? We've been thinking a lot about this, and while we have only 2 hours together today, our 2 speakers will set the stage for conversations for this coming year. We are intentionally using this summit to launch a series of monthly discussions to take a deeper dive into tangible and important topics that will empower us to reimagine our communities together. In April, we will explore the 5% transfer of wealth opportunity and ask the critical question, 5% for what? How can community leaders work together to maximize the 5% campaign for the long-term benefit of the communities that we live in, work in, and love? In May, we will address the equity gap in skills attainment as an economic driver for our region In this session, we will explore how to build resilient communities through cross-sector partnerships that ensure equity and skills attainment for the most vulnerable in our communities. In June, we'll dive deeper into broadband. COVID laid bare the inequities that exist for those who do not have access to high-speed internet. Whether it is healthcare, education, or the ability to work remotely, broadband is essential to how we actually connect with each other. While philanthropy will never actually fund the infrastructure development of broadband, we will explore innovative partnerships, opportunities, and solutions, and bring community voice to the table around this important conversation. In July and August, we know that all of you will be enjoying the beautiful summer weather that we have in this region, but we hope that you will take time to join us at one of our regional receptions. And then we will culminate our series of discussions in September around closing the opportunity gap in education. And after you hear from Sam Radford today, you will understand why this conversation is so important. And this is a session that you will not want to miss. So let's get started. I'm excited to introduce you to our keynote speaker who will set the stage for these topics and more. Paul Shoemaker will both inspire us and provide practical advice on being rebuilders in our community. I got my hand on Paul's new book, Taking Charge of Change, How Rebuilders Solve Hard Problems, and I'm really enjoying it. And I especially like page 97, where on the title, if hopefully you can see it here, it says, "You had better have women in the room." Paul, I knew that you were a wise man. And for those of you who have not picked up this book, I highly encourage it. Great book. Paul Shoemaker is an author, podcaster, consultant, and nationally recognized speaker. He's the founding president of Social Venture Partners International, a global network of thousands of social innovators, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and business and community leaders that support social change agents. I could go on and on about Paul's awards, experiences, and accolades, but instead I'm just going to say this. I've had a chance to get to know Paul in the last few months in planning for today's summit, and I have found him to be a person of passion, kindness, and creativity, and you are going to love his inspirational ideas on leadership. Please join me in welcoming Paul Shoemaker.
Thank you so much, Shelley. It is awesome to be with all of you today. I'm already inspired. I'm already fired up. I want to be at every one of your monthly workshops to follow this. Just a note up front, I'm going to spend 90%, 95% of my time talking to you, because that's where I want to be, in the same room with you. But since I can't be, I'm going to use just a couple slides to give us some guideposts and sort of emphasize some key points as the day goes along. So let me do that real quick. Let me sort of give you a sense of what I'm going to be talking about, so you know the roadmap. So I'm going to sort of start with coming out of 2020, set the stage. What is the context for everything we're going to talk about today? Then I want to dive into what I believe are the leaders that we need. What are the vital traits for the decade ahead that can inform all of our work? I want to explain the idea of rebuilders and who they are and how I came across that and why I name them that. And then lastly, I'll finish with a call to action around taking charge of change. So that's my agenda. There are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. That quote is over 100 years old. It's strangely enough from Vladimir Lenin, and yet it is highly resonant today. That fit more than 1 week in 2020 for all of us. During 2020, there were weeks where things slowed down and were brought to a halt in ways that we've rarely seen, certainly in decades. Our economy basically stopped for about a month. Our schools were not in person for a long time, and still some kids are not in person. And the lack of direct human connection and contact, we still don't know the ramification of that. There were other weeks during 2020 where things accelerated in ways we never believed possible. We didn't know there was going to be a need for a vaccine a year ago, and we're putting it into people's arms today. That is amazing. Another thing that accelerated in the last year, in 2020, were economic, social, and health inequities. in America. Economically, the wealth disparity, it got exacerbated. It grew even further in kind of a perverse way. From a health standpoint, the disparities in death rates for Black and brown people compared to the rest of the population. And from a social as well as economic standpoint, the careers of millions of women leaders were delayed or stalled. One woman leader I talked to said, we've lost a decade of progress. We need to make up for that. So we all like to talk about, and we hear hyperbole about years or moments that are inflection points. 2020 was absolutely an inflection point. There was more than 1 week in 2020 when a decade happened. So we all can't help but be affected by that and impacted by that, but it doesn't mean we can't do anything about and with that. Our kids and our communities are depending upon us to do that. So my message today, it's about hope, it's about rebuilding, it's about reimagining. The context, though, also is our challenges ahead. It's not just about economic, social, and health inequities. We also have a siloed, divided America in some ways like we haven't seen for probably over 100 years. We have a technology divide and hypermedia that love to amplify our divisions and silos in ways that we sometimes don't understand and seems like we can't control. We have a breadth and depth of challenges that's truly unique, historic, generational, jobs automation, rural-urban disparities, climate, geopolitical issues. I could go on and on. And we also have this fascinating blurring between the lines of the nonprofit, for-profit, and public sectors. There's an opportunity in there. There is also complexity in there for sure. So let me just put a slide back up to restate the challenges I just described to you to make sure they're in your head as we listen and we talk today. Economic and social and health inequities, a divided, siloed, fractured America, a technology divided hypermedia that are amplifiers of those divisions, a scale and scope of generational historic challenges, and the blurring of the three sectors. I'm going to spend my time on the first three of those. If we want to come and talk about one of the other ones in Q&A, I would be more than glad to do that. Every one of those challenges was already getting harder in 2019, and then 2020 just accelerated them. That is our world today. It's not just about inequity, it's about complexity. There are 7 major tectonic plates on the planet Earth. Some of us know what it feels like when one of them shakes. Sometimes it seems like these days, multiple of those tectonic plates are shaking on us at the same time. I rarely in the course of my work sort of step back and take the time to see the forest, not just the trees. That's what I did in my research on this book. The challenges I just listed to you, they weren't shocking to me that they existed, but what I can tell for you personally is that the breadth and the depth and how they've been building over the last generation was a profound experience for me. It gave me a personal sense of urgency about writing this book. So just to be clear, I don't feel dejected, I feel determined. I am a little tired like all of us, but I also feel tested and ready. So my dad was a Methodist minister, and you can find many versions of Proverbs 27:17. I grabbed one the other day. Just as iron shapes iron, so a person shapes the character of the friend. I hope everybody is here today to shape the character of their friends and to have to sharpen ourselves for the days and the work ahead of ourselves. So complexity is our leadership context. There's more complexity in America than we have faced in at least 60, probably 80 years. I was a basketball referee for about 10 years. And I remember one game when I was working with a veteran official, and it was one of these sort of squirrely, gnarly games at the start of it. And the first time out, we were talking and he looked at me and he said, sometimes you have to referee the game that you've got, not the one that you wish you had. And that really stuck with me. So where we are today is we have a world that maybe isn't everything we wish it was. It's the world we have, and that's the world we need to lead in. But where we are today does not have to be where we're going in the decade ahead. As has always been the case and always will be the case, these times call for a new kind of leader. civically active, socially conscious leaders in the private, nonprofit, and public sectors that is ready to define the leader they need to be for the decade ahead in a siloed, uneven America. One of the 38 exemplars that I write about in the book is a guy by the name of Dan Cardinelli. He described something to me that I want to share with you briefly. It's on page 9 of the book. So what Dan said was, the best jazz pianists are both technically good and creatively agile. Metaphorically, we have a lot of existing leaders who are technically proficient today, but not agile enough for tomorrow's complexity. They are still playing the same old tunes in the same old way. We need leaders that are tuned to the times. My message isn't one that old leadership models are broken or irrelevant. It's just that every time and place in history calls upon different qualities and different traits that are best tuned to meet the moment. One passage I wrote in the book, and I mean this very personally, I'm worried about America in the dark of the night, but I am fundamentally optimistic in the light of day. We do live in a more uneven, fractured America than any of us could have even envisioned even one generation ago. At the end of the day, we have to get this right for America, for the world, and for your 20-county region. I am here today for you and for your communities. I believe there are vital traits that are best tuned for this decade ahead. They are the vital traits of the leaders we need, the vital traits that can empower each of you to be a positive force in your communities. So let me sort of table set here what those traits are, and then I'm going to start sharing with you where I came up with those and why. There are 5 of them: generosity mindset and 24/7 authenticity. Those are more personal qualities. The tangible skill sets of data conviction and capacity for complexity. And then this sort of integrating quality trait I call cross-sector fluency. I'm not going to talk about all of them today. I am glad to talk to you about any of them in the chat, in the Q&A, afterwards, next week, next month. But I'm going to touch on 3 of them today, and it's these 3: generosity mindset, 24/7 authenticity, and capacity for complexity. And those 3 people there, those are the 3 stories I want to talk to you and tell you about today. In the upper left corner, that is Roseanne Haggerty. She runs an organization called Community Solutions. In the lower left, that's Michael McAfee. He runs PolicyLink. And in the lower right is Dreama Gentry. She runs the Berea College Partnership. If you would, just take a second to try to sort of like get their pictures and get their faces in your head so you can remember them as we're talking about them in just a minute. So one question I want to ask you guys in the chat for just a second. You've been sitting here listening to me talk about leadership traits. I'm going to dive into it more deeply. I'm going to give you my point of view. I'd be curious, what do you think is the most important leadership trait that you're going to have to develop and you're going to have to build in the decade ahead? So if you want to throw that in the chat, it'd be just sort of fun to see what folks are thinking and what kinds of qualities and traits you think are the most important for the decade ahead. So let me start with Dreama Gentry. She is the executive director of Partners for Education at Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. It's about 45 miles south of Lexington. Their mission is to help 50,000 students in Appalachia succeed. She took it from 2 people working with a $300,000 budget to deploying more than $40 million in resources each year in Appalachian, Kentucky. The first challenge I mentioned today was, how do we deal with these growing, accelerating economic, health, and social inequities and disparities? So I think the trait that is best tuned to meet that challenge in these times is what I call capacity for complexity. What this trait is about is the ability to process a myriad of variables. You not only take them in and see them, you can process them, you can interpret them, you can communicate them back out. It's about making forward progress. It's also about being and thinking in a nonlinear way, in a less sequential way. It's about knowing past solutions may be decreasingly relevant to the future answers, hence the need to rethink, rebuild, reimagine. It's about adaptability and being able to take in new information constantly. A personal reflection as I was writing this book and talking to these folks, it made me think about and look at myself. And of these 5 traits, this is definitely the one where I'm the weakest and I have the most work to do because I tend to be a pretty linear thinker. Dreama was, when she came into this role, she was resource constrained. She has grown it by magnitudes. She did it by being cross-sector. She worked across geographies, cultures, and ethnicities, just like many of you have to. Her biggest constraint is interesting. She said to me one time I talked to her, too often people think only of roots and not of wings. She said people need both. They need deep roots in a community, and they need the wings to fly and see the world from a different perspective. Those are the words with someone with a strong complexity capacity. I very much hope all of you have your wings on for our conversations today. Over a 3-year period, they increased the percentage of kindergarten-ready students in the Berea College Promise neighborhood area from 16 to 36%. So they're not just doing important work, they are doing effective work. And as Shelley said up front, there's a sidebar in this chapter. It's called, You Better Have Women in the Room. So this is not to be politically correct. I'm not trying to make my wife or my sisters or Shelley happy. I just happen to truly believe it. We need both, but here's the deal. Guys like me, on average, more linear, not as able to get outside of our own way of thinking. I find women better at navigating complexity and able to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. None of this is universal, but I've been in too many experiences where that is the truth. And I'm a huge believer in women leaders. And this certainly applies to ethnicity, skills, et cetera, a whole range of diversities about who we need in the room to tackle our challenges and our problems. Mark Benioff is the CEO of Salesforce. The guy's done okay for himself. He said, I don't want to have any more meetings without at least a third of the people in the room being women. That's pretty powerful. So we can accept the world I described a minute ago as it is, or we can find and build more leaders with complexity capacity, like Dreama Gentry. All right, so I told you about one of these rebuilders. I want to tell you about 2 more in just a minute. But what I do want to do is I want to explain to you how I came to these 5 traits and came on the idea of rebuilders. And also how I learned so much from the 3 people I'm going to talk about today, as well as the other 35 people in the book. And by the way, I learned as much about or more about myself as I did about them. So in 2018 and 2019, which of course now known as the calm years, I started doing some research based on my 20 plus years working on social impact across all 3 sectors. I drew lots of Venn diagrams. I had lots of spreadsheets. I had lots of stuff on the whiteboard. I was trying to understand the intersection between 3 things: great leaders, true social impact, and what qualities would it take to meet the challenges of our time, the intersection of those traits. So let me also do this with you visually again for just a second. So these are some of the groups I worked with across all 3 sectors. I'm not here to, brag about my associations. I am trying to establish credibility with y'all that says I've done a lot of deep work across all 3 sectors on a wide range of projects over the last 20 plus years. And these are just some of the organizations that I've worked with. So back to what I said a minute ago, visually. What I was looking for in these leaders was the intersection of great leaders, true social impact, and the traits and qualities that would help us meet the challenges of the decade ahead. The intersection of those, that is what those 5 traits came out of. I literally was spending time thinking about traits that fed in each one of those. And then at some point in time, I literally put them together and looked for what was the intersection. And that's where these 5 traits came out of. It's my opinion. It is a prospective one. It's a subjective one. It's also well-informed, and I feel very passionate about it. Another question for the chat. I'm interested. I've told you about Dream. I'm going to tell you about two more folks. I'm curious if anybody in the room, when you see this and you think about this, are there particular people that you think of that you think meet all three of those traits that represent that kind of leader to you in your work or in your region? So that's how I ride to 5 traits. I needed a metaphor to link them together, and in part to strengthen the point they don't just live individually, that each one of them strengthens each other. So in the upper left corner, that is a bridge underneath a road in the woods behind my house in Fort Dodge, Iowa, in Snell Crawford Park. That picture was taken a while ago, as you can tell, and that was my dad and my brother walking down the creek. So that bridge right there, I would sit underneath it in the summer. I wasn't an engineer, but I was truly fascinated by how bridges worked. Any bridge has those 3 parts. So the state of bridges, to me, is very evocative of the state of our civil society in America. Bridges in America are in a state of disrepair. 40% need to be repaired. 8% of them are in need of urgent rebuilding. Bridges in America are only as strong as their underlying foundations. We need to rebuild our bridges and our civil society. And these are not just traits. To me, coming out of 2020, it's a mindset. It's a mindset of rebuilding. So that's who these leaders are. That's how I found them. And that's why I call them rebuilders. And this is also sort of sharing with you my journey from an idea I had from a book I was thinking about writing in 2018 to one I decided I should write in 2019. And in 2020, I absolutely believed I had to write this. I was compelled to. So let me tell you about 2 more rebuilders and their stories. Another one of those 5 challenges I posed up front was, how do we deal with and lead in a divided, siloed America, no matter where you are in America? To me, the trait that's best tuned to meet this moment is what I call generosity mindset. The first person to use that term to me when I was talking to her on the phone and she was walking down the street in New York City was Roseanne Haggerty. She's the executive director of Community Solutions, whose mission it is to create a lasting end to homelessness and leave no one behind. That's a powerful mission statement. So generosity mindset is about looking for what each of us has to share and to give. It's about getting the most from everyone. It's about assuming good intent. Of all 5 traits, it is the most obvious one when it's missing in a team, in a meeting, or a community. It's interesting. Our silos, in a lot of ways, we look at our political divides. I think in some ways, our politics is just a symptom of the silos, not the cause of them. It's some of both. But a lot of this was already existed. And so we need these kinds of leaders. In a new book, David French, who's a Time columnist, wrote a book called Divided We Fall. And he said, there's not a single important cultural, religious, or social force that's pulling America together more than it's pushing it apart. So let me be clear about generosity mindset. This is not about a nicey nice idea. It is a hard-edged strategy. It's a mindset of strength. It's a deeply and fiercely held conviction. We actually see it more and more rarely, but when we do, it really sticks out. It is going to become more and more unique, more and more valuable, and probably the hardest one to put into practice in the decade ahead. Community Solutions and their Built for Zero initiative have ended veteran or chronic homelessness in 14 communities around the USA, and they've reduced the incidence of homelessness in over 80 cities. Again, that's not just a trait, that's impact. 2 other folks that I would point you to real quickly that I think are exemplars of this. I started a podcast, it's called Rebuilders. It's a really fun way to keep a book alive that was written in a moment in time. The most recent conversation I did was with Cecilia Gutierrez. She is phenomenal. I started asking questions at one point. I just stopped and shut up and listened to her because what she had to say about generosity mindset was so powerful. In the lead up to this conference, someone also told me about Paul Kimmel. So when 85% of the homes and buildings were lost in the Babb Road fire in Malden and Pine City, apparently he showed up the next day and he said, how can I help? And apparently he hasn't taken too many days off since then. That to me is what I would call boots on the ground generosity mindset. So again, we can accept the world as it is today, or we can decide to build up leaders with a generosity mindset, like Roseanne Haggerty, like Cecilia Gutierrez, and like Paul Kimmel. Last area I want to talk to you about, and another one of those questions that I posed up front. How do we deal with this accelerating complexity of a growing technology divide and hypermedia that loves to exacerbate our divisions and our silos? The trait to me that's best tuned to meet these times is what I call 24/7 authenticity. So Michael McAfee, who was the gentleman in the lower left corner of that picture, he's the CEO of PolicyLink, whose mission is to advance economic and racial equity. The definition to me of someone with 24/7 authenticity is someone worthy of belief. They are not false. They are true to their own spirit and character. It's sort of where the intersection to me of radical transparency meets this hypermedia world that we live in. You have to decide to be authentic before you have, then you have to decide to be authentic before you have to be authentic. Edelman's a communications firm. They do an annual report called the Trust Barometer. And in 2021, the report led off with this statement. After a year of unprecedented turbulence, our 2021 Trust Barometer reveals a widespread mistrust of institutions and leaders. Adding to this is a failing trust ecosystem and a mandate to rebuild trust and chart a new path forward. So again, 24/7 authenticity is about being proactive, not responsive and reactive. And many of these individuals are grounded, interestingly, in spirituality and faith. The number one asset they possess is trust. The first 24/7 leader in that book is Michael McAfee. And I want to read for you just a brief section in the book about him because it's so instructive and so powerful. So coming out of college, Michael was one of those rising stars that each of us have been, hopefully at some point in time. And within a few years of the organization he worked with, he was presented with a great professional opportunity to go work in a youth development organization. It reacquainted him with some of the inequities he was familiar with from his own youth. Michael is a guy that does not lose track of his roots. Now, though, he was doing that from a position of leadership. So over time, McAfee went back to his bosses and he said, look, here's what's wrong and broken, and this is what needs to change. That wasn't what they wanted to hear from the rising star. So as Michael told me, he could have easily remained the star by staying quiet and saying things would just get better. Instead, he championed the issues and the inequities he saw, and he pressed for change. By doing so, he went from being the rising star to an angry Black man and was sent to anger management classes. 24/7 authenticity is not free. There is a cost to pay sometimes. When I asked him what his internal checklist is for how he maintains his authenticity, he told me three really simple but powerful things. Number one, does being truly authentic bring me joy? Number two, who are you accountable to and who are you ultimately working for? And number three, it matters to be around money and power. Always try to influence it for the good. Never let it own you. 24/7 has costs and it has trade-offs. It's not free. Another person that folks told me about in the lead up to this conference was Kayloni Scott. So she returned home to work with her Nez Perce community. She came back to invest in creating a better life for future generations. That is walking away from one opportunity and moving towards another one that mattered more. She made a decision that had costs and trade-offs. That is what 24/7 authenticity looks like. I'll say it one more time. We can accept the world as it is, or we can find and build leaders with 24/7 authenticity, like Michael McAfee and Kayloni Scott. So just a few final thoughts. as I saw those 5 challenges, especially the economic and social and health disparities, it truly got me going. When I talked to the people in the book, it inspired me to keep writing. It sincerely went from a book that I thought about writing in 2018, that I wanted to write in 2019, and I had to write in 2020. Taking charge of change speaks to facing the times, not waiting, being proactive. We live in a fundamentally different America than we did 20, even 10 years ago. We need rebuilders for our bridges and our communities and our companies across the United States. One final note. I was putting the finishing touches on this book. It's like the last little diddles and last edits in February of 2020. I was almost done with the book that I wanted to write. I want to show you what my version of that book looked like back in February 2020. So it was really nice and pristine and clean. And then March and COVID happened. And I started to change everything all over the place. This is literally one of the versions that I saved along the way. I needed to tune my message to the moment, just like these leaders did. I wrote about 38 leaders in this book because, not just because of the 5 traits they possess, but because I hope everyone can see themselves in at least a few of these leaders. Just like the people at this conference today, we each need to define the leader we need to be for the decade ahead. These are some of the folks in the book. They are, every one of them, inspiring leaders that fits one of those traits and one of those characteristics. In 2019, I feel like I sort of had this early look at leaders that were going to be particularly relevant in 2020, and the kind of traits and qualities that are going to be amplified and a higher need for. Let me close with one last passage from the book, and then let's throw it open to questions from you folks. America is at a looming inflection point. COVID has brought us even more abruptly to a massive reset moment for America and the world. Like all change, our times are not only cause for uncertainty, but opportunities for new leaders to step forward. The previous 20 years might as well have been equivalent to a century full of change that we are still trying to catch up to. Massive upheavals like 2020 can be moments for undoing and expelling old ways of thinking and working and being. In times like these, leadership is the seminal lever in society. Those who show up with the 5 vital traits will not only be rebuilders for the future, they will be genuine American heroes. Thank you so much for your attention and your time. I hope you can tell what a passion this book is for me and how deeply I care about leadership for the decade ahead. And I think we got about 10 minutes here. I would love to answer whatever questions are coming up in the chat. Aaron, Sarah, fire away.
Thank you, Paul. Remarkable. Thanks so much for inspiring us. And already there are a couple of great questions. I would encourage people, as I tee up this first question to Paul, please drop your questions into the chat box. We know we will not get to all of them, but we're going to do our darndest. Paul, Courtney Kramer is one of our Leadership Council members from down in the LC Valley. She works at Washington State University. She's a rebuilder herself. She put an incredible question in the chat box earlier that has lit up some incredible dialogue. It's about the impact on women in the workforce, and that COVID has basically put us back nearly 4 decades to the numbers of women that are in the workforce. Would you just speak to that, and what are some of the ways that you see that we can reverse that trend in our society and bring diverse women leaders back into the room, back into the workforce, back into leadership positions in our communities?
Thanks for starting with a small, easy question. And by the way, if folks don't get your question answered today, my email is shoe@paulshoemaker.org. That's very easy to remember, so don't hesitate to write to me. I would say a couple things. Number one, I wrote that section of the book before 2020 happened. So all I would say is that now that notion of having women in the room is even more important. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to look around either the literal or the metaphorical room and say, who's at the table? Just like we want to make sure there are people at the table with lived experiences that are people of color and different ethnicities, we got to make sure women are at the table. Secondly, there are ways to invest in women leaders. Another one of my podcasts is with a woman by the name of Vicki Saunders. She runs an organization called SheEO. The website is sheo.world. It is a phenomenal community of female entrepreneurs. And she talks extensively in there about this problem and about how they're going to reinvest in women for the future. So I would say, secondly, just like we would invest in communities when they're having challenges, let's invest in women leaders. And the third thing I would say is, whoever is sort of at that table of power, we need to look around it. And the more complex the situation, the more complex the scenario, if you don't have women in the room, you are not going to solve the problem. I've literally, in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been in 3 situations where it was a room full of men and it failed. So the last thing I would say is, if you want to be effective, you had better be looking around the room. And I can't speak for companies. I think another thing that's happened in 2020 is companies have understood that they need to address leaders, women leaders in their companies in a very different way. And I see some making progress. There's a lot more progress to be made. That's a handful of things I think of. I think it's just important for all of us to understand what sort of progression in leadership was stalled or delayed for women, and how can we jumpstart them back up to where they were and keep them moving forward. Great question.
Great. Okay, Paul, this is kind of a fun one. One of our donors on the call and a fund founder of an incredibly inspiring scholarship fund in our region is asking this question: what did you have to cut out that you'd like to put back into the book? And sort of thinking like a movie's cut or a director's cut. Thanks, Michelle, for that great question.
What are the outtakes, right? Yeah. You know, I guess what I would honestly say, as much as anything, is the 2 things. One, at some point, you know, you can only have so many stories in the book. I talked to at least 100 people to write this book. So I pulled 38 out to put in the book and have stories that exemplified those 5 traits. There's a whole bunch of people that are on the cutting room floor, if you will, metaphorically, and that are just about as inspiring as the people in the book. And I would love to, and what I am going to do, by the way, podcasts are awesome. Other than the fact that there's 10 million of them, so I know we don't need one more of them. A podcast is an awesome way to have a conversation. It's an awesome way to keep a book alive. So I'm going to bring some of those people back onto my podcast too. The other sort of outtake, if you will, is towards the back of the book, I give a handful of examples of, if we roll all these traits together, what's a few examples where things failed? And where's a few examples where things succeeded? And there's a bunch more examples of actually both that I would love to have kept in the book. I'm working on it. We'll be finished in the next couple of days. I'm working on a discussion guide. And that discussion guide will help groups and teams and individuals sort of think more deeply about the material. And I plan to bring a few of those case studies into that discussion guide. So just more about the leaders that I talked to and more about the cases where communities and programs succeeded and failed. I could have told 100 more of each.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Hey, we've got a great question from Seema Thorpe, who is the executive director of the ARC of Spokane, one of our amazing nonprofits in our community that serves folks with developmental disabilities. And Seema asked the question, how do you recommend beginning this conversation with a leadership team?
Number one, I'll have the discussion guide in a couple of days and I'll send it to you guys. You can send it out to everybody. I think the first way to start this literally is, the simplest way to think of it is a checklist. And that's too simple, but it's the way to start, I think. As an individual, look at myself and decide, what muscle do I need to build, and or what do I need to compensate for? I've always known I'm a pretty linear thinker, and my wife and I have this joke that sometimes there's too many inputs coming in, so just, shut down. I don't know how much more I can develop that capacity and that strength. So part of it's also recognizing what I'm strong at, what I'm weak at, and not letting my weaknesses sort of get in the way of other leaders taking on. So that's one way. I could absolutely see a conversation amongst a group of people, and I'm going to help with one of these next week, sitting around the table, just talking about their team and their work and applying those 5 traits to the situation you're in. One of the examples I gave in the book was homelessness in King County. And a lot of you are familiar with that. It's not just an urban issue, it's a rural issue, but in King County in particular, it's just been devastating in so many ways, not just for homeless people, but citizens and small business owners. And it goes on and on and on. And I sort of look back on it. I knew a lot of people involved in it. And I did sort of a retrospective look. And I do think there was a couple of these traits that were fundamentally missing in how they addressed the problem 10 years ago. So I think people can take this as a checklist individually and as a group, apply it to the situation you're in, and just use it to talk about where are you weak, where are you strong, see where the group and the team agrees and disagrees, and then who's missing from the table and what muscle do we need to build together as a group? That's a great question.
Great question. Thank you, Paul. The last question we have time for now, and then we'll wrap up here, folks, and we're going to take a short break. But Paul, we had a great question from John Rushi, who's on our leadership council down in the LC Valley. He's also been an incredible partner with the LC Valley Healthcare Foundation. And John asked, knowing that conflict and combat, they always catch eyes, right? They get elevated. And you touched on that in so many ways in your book. In a community, absent a shared vision, how can a community or a region come together so that leaders can be effective? What would you recommend if there isn't a shared vision?
So there's an example in the book. It's in the chapter, on the chapter on data conviction. It's a guy by the name of Jeff Edmondson. So I would say if you get the book, go look at that section of that book. And he's been involved in a huge national project called Strive Together, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. And he goes back to the early days and he talked about people in Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky getting together to talk about this problem in the absence of a shared vision. And they just went around in circles. They talked about programs and who's going to work with who. And at one point in one meeting, I can't remember exactly who it was or what the situation was, but what they changed to was, what is the goal and what is the purpose? It's not about programs. It's not about who's going to do what, right? Because if I start at that level, I have the damnedest time getting to alignment. So it may sound kind of simple when you hear it sort of said out loud here, looking back on a case study, but he said literally the pivot point. And I know literally one of the moments that happened was that one of the people in the conversation was the coroner in Cincinnati. And he said, I don't want to see one more kid on my table. And I think that also sort of sharpened their thinking away from people and away from programs and away from, terse, and said, what's our shared goal? What's our shared purpose? So I would say, get away from programs, get away from who does what, and go back to wipe that all off and say, what is the goal? And then frankly, what is the data that we're going to need to support that goal? Because one of the other qualities is data conviction. These problems we're trying to solve today, I think we all know this. Data is not simple. Data is not black and white. It needs to be disaggregated, but we're not truly going to make progress on a problem without the data. So what drove them forward was they finally arrived at a shared goal and the data to support it. And then all the conversations about people and programs started to fall in line.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. So great to have you with us. Everyone, please give a virtual huge round of applause to Paul for being with us today. We are going to take a really short break. If there are more questions, we're going to bring Paul back in later on as a part of our panel. So now you got a chance to take a quick break, take a stretch, refill your coffee cup. You can leave your video on or turn it off, but please rejoin us. You won't want to miss what's going to happen next. We're going to give you a break until 9:57. You have 5 minutes, and then please come back and join us. Be back here at 9:57 sharp, and we will jump right back in. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
I'm having a blast in your chat.
I know I can see empty spots, so I'm going to wait just a few more minutes as we have folks that probably had the same jaunt we did down the hall to the bathroom. So it's just been an incredible morning so far. Thank you, Paul, for your excellent comments. Right. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started just because of timing. We have an incredible speaker coming up next. And there were so many highlights from last year's Leadership Summit, but for me, probably the brightest moment was meeting and hearing from Sam Radford. Sam had a front row seat to the transformational impact of Say Yes to Education in his home community of Buffalo, New York. And as we formulated our theme for today for Reimagining Our Communities, we couldn't imagine a better person or message than to bring Sam back to share how Say Yes was instrumental, ensuring that students in Buffalo didn't just survive, but have even thrived during the COVID pandemic. This is the opportunity that we have for our region to close the opportunity gap, to develop talent regionally, and ensure that every single child has the opportunity and support to pursue their dreams. But what is Say Yes to Education? I know that many of you have actually had a preview, but for those of you who are new, we wanted to just give you a moment of what is Say Yes for Education. It is the bold promise that what if an entire community came together to ensure that each of its children had the opportunity and the support to go to college and succeed in completing their education. That is the bold promise of Say Yes to Education. And when I say college, I mean technical 2-year, 4-year. So it's all encompassing, but this is our big, hairy, audacious goal for our region. It's not just a Promise Scholarship model. Promise Scholarships leave about 30% of students behind. This is both a Promise Scholarship and a community coming together to actually support our children to ensure that every single child can pursue their dreams. The model has actually been around for over 30 years on the East Coast. It was started by a man named George Weiss, who grew up, as he said, on the wrong side of the tracks and said if he ever made it, that he was going to give back and reinvest in children and provide that opportunity. And he started with a small cohort, 100 kids, where he said, if you graduate from high school, I will send you to college. And then what he did was he involved himself personally and hired staff and ensured that every single one of those kids had the support that they needed to graduate from high school and go on to college. Again, college is encompassing 2-year, technical 4-year. But he did it for 100 kids, and then he did it for another 100 kids, and then 700 kids, and they kept doing these cohorts. And then he finally said, we're never going to get far enough if we just do it 100 kids at a time. We need to think bigger. We need to do large cities. So they launched in Syracuse, and then they launched in Buffalo. That's where Sam comes in. And then they launched in Guilford County, North Carolina. And in 2019, they launched in Cleveland. We had an opportunity to hear about the Say Yes model a couple years ago. And after diving deep into their model, I reached out to their CEO, Gene Chasen, who has been just incredible to work with. And I said, Gene, I absolutely love the Say Yes to Education model. As you'll hear from Sam, it has transformed their communities. It can transform our communities. I said, but here's the problem, Gene. I said, you guys aren't thinking big enough. You have developed a model that is serving one school district and one community. We want to challenge you to think bigger. We want you to help us launch Say Yes to Education in our region that is 20 counties, 2 states, and multiple school districts. And we believe that we can do it. We live in a region that we have made the impossible possible. We held the World's Fair in 1974. Who would have thought that Spokane would ever do that, right? We have Bloomsday. It's the largest timed foot race in the world. We have the largest 3-on-3 basketball tournament with Hoop Fest. We have a medical school that was actually funded in the worst pandemic since the Great Recession. This region is known for making the impossible possible. And we believe that we can have that transformational impact on the children in our region. So we spent a year and a half working behind the scenes on Say Yes to Education. Pre-COVID, we brought together over 600 people in communities around the region. We've met with national and regional partners, and we officially launched Say Yes last March with Sam as our closing keynote speaker at our leadership summit. And then 2 weeks later, COVID hit. So our world took a little bit of a turn and we had to readjust our sails, but we are back. And Sam is here to re-energize, re-engage us, and to inspire us so that we can reimagine our region and our communities in a transformational way for the children who live here and that we serve. So who is Sam Radford? Sam is the director of Community Action Organization of Western New York, Better Schools, Better Neighborhoods, which promotes opportunities for low-income individuals, families, and communities to achieve and sustain self-sufficiency. He is also the immediate past president of Buffalo School District's Parenting Coordinating Council, and Sam is the parent representative for Buffalo's Say Yes Operating Committee. Most importantly, Sam has been one of our biggest cheerleaders and encouragers as we seek to launch Say Yes to Education in North Idaho and Eastern Washington. And one other thing I have to say about Sam that you're going to love is Sam didn't believe that this was possible in Buffalo. So for all of you who don't believe that this is possible for our region, I want you to listen closely to Sam, because we do believe here at Innovia Foundation that generosity and igniting generosity can make the impossible possible. So please join me in welcoming Sam Radford.
Can't hear Sam yet.
Sam, we can't hear you. Uh-oh. Now can
you hear me now?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Welcome.
All right, there we go. All right, so we tested this like 5 times, and this technology, that's the way it works. So first of all, let me just thank you so much, Shelley, just for such a wonderful welcome, and Aaron and Sarah and all the people at the Innovia Foundation, all of you in Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho. Listen, I really feel like I'm the adopted son of the region. Last year when I was there, and it's actually the last time I actually spoke in person. So last year when I was there, I really felt so welcome. It was such a wonderful and beautiful region of the country. I really appreciate this opportunity to share before you today. I don't have as much time as I did last year, so I'm gonna jump right into this, right? So if you remember last year, one of the first things I do anytime I speak is I acknowledge the presence of a true and living God. I'm not that important, trust me when I tell you that. And I believe that ultimately what it comes down to is our ability to submit ourselves to a higher power to be able to help get these things done. That's just my personal belief. But what I want to talk to you about today is Say Yes Again. We talked about it last year, and when we talked about it last year, we were ultimately dealing with our experience in Buffalo, but I want to talk to you from a different perspective this year, right? I want to talk to you this year, and what I want you to do is I want you to be able to look through my eyes. That's what I hope to get done today. I hope to be able to get you to look through my eyes. First of all, let me just say that Paul gave a wonderful presentation. Let's give a big round for Paul for that wonderful presentation that Paul gave. Because it really captures in so many ways the exact experience that we had in Buffalo. I mean, a lot of the points that you heard him talk about, I'm gonna reiterate, you're gonna hear them again, because it was actually what our lived experience was. But what I wanna get done with you today is I'm hoping that the experience that we had in Buffalo, I'm hoping to get you to be able to see through my eyes what's possible for Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho, the 20-county region, see what's possible. And I'm saying I want to help you see, because I know how important that is, right? We didn't have that when we started in Buffalo. We didn't have somebody who could come help us see and have the experiences that could translate. We had some, Syracuse launched before us. We had some experience of smaller sections, but we were going whole city. You talking about going 20 county region is gonna be beneficial if you have the ability to see through someone else's experience what is possible, right? Like Shelley said, when I got involved, I didn't think it was possible. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But before I get into seeing, I want to ask you a question. I want to make at least 2 parts of this interactive so we can have a conversation and have a little bit of fun at the same time. I want everybody to answer this question in the chat. Is it possible for you to look at something and not see it? Just put a yes or no. In the chat, just put yes or no. Yes or no. I mean, give me a sense of what most people saying yes or no, yes, no's, yes, no's, all right? A lot of yeses. It's possible to look at something and not see it, right? Okay. Well, I mean, that's counterintuitive. I'm looking, but I don't see. So the question is, if you can look at something and not see it, why don't you see it if you're looking at it? What's the block? What's the barrier? So we're going to do a quick exercise right quick, just for those people who don't understand what we're talking about, to get a sense of why seeing is a critical part of what we want to get done today, so we can come up with a really unified effort to do what Shelley talked about in the vision in terms of making sure everybody from every region thrives, right? So I'm going to do a quick exercise. I mean, you'll throw up the F's exercise, all right? So this is what I need you to do. All I want you to do is I want you to see on the screen, there's a statement on there. It starts with the word finish and it ends with the word years. All I want you to do is count how many letter F's are in that paragraph and then put it in the chat. That's all. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do that. We only got so much time, just 30 seconds, no tricks involved. Just put it in there and see how much it is, how many that there is. All right, we getting them? Okay, so I see 2, I see 3, I see 7, I see 3, 5. Wow, are we all reading the same thing? Okay, I see 3, I see 4. Okay, I see, okay. Yeah, okay, you can take it down, I mean. All right, listen up, everybody. You have just demonstrated to me how important what I'm getting ready to do is, because you are looking at this little short phrase here, but you're not seeing what's there, right? So I may you bring it back up for a second, right? So I want you to now slow down a little bit. Slow down. You slow down, I'm gonna slow down, right? All of you who put 3 F's, look at it again. It's because there's not 3 F's there. You're looking, but you're not seeing. All of you put 4 F's, look at it again. You're looking, but you're not seeing. And because of time, I'm not going to go into the whole back and forth I would do if I was there in person. But what I want you to know is that there are actually 6 F's in that little paragraph there, right? So I want you to go through and I want you to find all 6 F's. And I want you to, like, whether you got to read it backwards or go slow, I want you to find all 6 F's. And I'm going to tell you just as a quick answer for those who are looking. There you go, Paul. There you go, Paul. Paul, you're giving out the answers. All right. For those people who are not paying close attention, the first F is in finish, then files, and then there's an F in the first of. And that's where most people miss it at. Most people miss that first of. And then there's a 1 in scientific. Then there's another F and of again, and then there's another F and of at the bottom. I don't want to spend, if I was there in person, I would go through a process that kind of talk about how important it is paying attention to those little small letters, the little small details. You're going to get the point as I'm talking. But what I'm hoping you got from that exercise is how important it is, 1, to pay attention to the details. 2, that it's really possible that even if you're trying to look, if you're trying to see, it's difficult. You have to really work on the barriers that are preventing you to see. So I'm using that example because what I want to do is I want you to see what was going on in Buffalo 10 years ago. Because of what I want you to do is I want you to think about, as Shelley said earlier, I want you to think about what is going to be going on in the 20 county region 10 years from now. But in order for you to have an appreciation for 10 years from now, I want you to go back with me to 10 years ago. So what was going on in Buffalo in March of 2011? That's 10 years ago, right? I was a young, I wasn't that young, but I was a parent leader in Buffalo. And I want you to get a feel for what was happening in Buffalo. I'm gonna talk about the details of what happened in Buffalo, but before I do that, I'm gonna just show you a short video that just kind of captures it. But this is what I want you to do before you watch the video. Cue the video, Emmanuel. I want you to pay attention to the video, and I want you in the chat box, I want you to say what you see happening. What stands out for you? What do you see going on? And it's a short, it's only like 40-second video, but I want you to type in the chat box what stands out for you. All right,
the Buffalo school boycott making the grade when it comes to improving local education.
Parents are taking their crusade straight to the steps of City Hall. News 4 senior correspondent Rich Newberg is following this story, which is now catching some national interest. Rich?
Well, almost half of Buffalo students took the day off from school today. It was a half day for teachers training. Organizers of today's boycott say they need to create a sense of urgency to change a system that they claim is failing its students. Rallying to a drumbeat on the steps of Buffalo City Hall, the District Parent Coordinating Council sought to justify its one-day boycott of Buffalo City schools.
So we said we have to have the courage and take the risk to interrupt the way this system is operating. The system is broken.
A system, they say, that has become comfortable, even though as many as 70 to 75% of its African-American students can become dropouts.
And because they have become comfortable, then it will take agitation to make change.
Change as radical as having the state take over Buffalo schools as an emergency option.
I get rid of the whole echelon up there, the board, the superintendent, all of them. They all got to go.
The Buffalo school boycott was opposed by the superintendent and the teachers union. They said it sent the wrong message to children. Another critic blamed poor student achievement on a lack of parental involvement.
Parents need to get involved. They don't come and they don't see their children's work.
The boycott organizers are also calling for 100% school attendance on June 1st.
Don't forget, June 1st, we're asking for 100% every student in school. I don't want to hear we're pulling kids out. We're saying education is important, and all parents in this community have to be invested in education.
All right, so let's give me some examples, kind of say some of the examples of what we're hearing in the chat box. So,
protest to force change.
Peaceful protest to force change.
People blaming the parents.
People blaming each other. You know,
advocating ownership, standing up for change.
So you really got, you really in a sense, you see in a microcosm what was going on in Buffalo. And you know what's interesting about that video as I watch it now? So much of what we were seeing in Buffalo in 2011, we see it going on in our country today, and really like kind of a macrocosm. And so that's what was going on in Buffalo. You know what I'm saying? Go to the first slide, Emmanuel. We had essentially, you heard them say that the teachers union was against our protests. You heard them say the superintendent was against the protests. You heard them say that, we had community coming together, standing together in protest. You heard people blaming the parents. But what you saw is a group of people, if you go back to what Paul was talking about, you saw everybody in their silo. Everybody was in their silo, pointing and blaming about who was the cause of the problem. But at the end of the day, what we were feeling as parents is that we were participating in a system that was broken, and it was really not a genuine effort to fix it. And so we withdrew participation. But what I want to point out to you is that going to get the job done? Is the peaceful protest, is the fighting with the superintendent, is all that going to get us to a place where all of our children can have a top quality education? Because that's really what we wanted. That's what it came down to. That's what we wanted to get done in Buffalo. And so the other things that were going on in Buffalo, go to the first slide there. Here's what was going on in Buffalo. At that time, in Buffalo in 2011, again, we was the third poorest city in the country, second highest on child poverty rate. We were one of the most segregated cities in the country. We also had like a 48% graduation rate. If you went back a year before that, we had like a 43% graduation rate. And this is really an important point, because that graduation rate was oscillating. It was going back and forth. So it was going between 40 and 50%. That's where it didn't go below 40, but didn't go above 50. It was just kind of oscillating over the previous 10 years between 40 and 50%. And I can go on into the details of what was dysfunctional, but what it boiled down to is we were not in a situation where every student was thriving. Some students did well, some students did terrible. What we wanted as parents, by and large, though, is a community much similar to what Shelley talked about, where all of our students thrived. And we was looking for a way to get there. Now, that's when the Say Yes opportunity came. And before I kind of get into what happened in the Say Yes opportunity, go to the next slide. Let me just kind of say something again to one of the points Paul made. When Say Yes first came, next slide. When Say Yes first came to Buffalo, that was not the first time that an effort was made to address the education system in Buffalo. Say Yes came ultimately because you've seen we had a community. We were drawing national attention by fighting each other and trying to make it to where our children did better in school and got better outcomes. We had started that fight. I've been a parent leader in Buffalo since 1990. And we have been effectively, trying different things since 2005. And I remember a point in like 2008 or 9 where we had the big banker in our area. M&T Bank is the big bank in our area. He brought in a business leader, Dr. Noel Tishy, who came in and had all of us in the room and kind of come up with a plan to help us improve education. And what stands out for me in this moment is that in that room, there were almost no women in that room. That room was the big bankers, the superintendent, it was the president of the union, it was the president of the businesses in our community, but it was very few, if any, women in that room. And so now I find that in hindsight interesting that was the case, because when Say Yes came to town, it was really brought to town by 2 women. It was brought to town by the president of our community foundation, Clotilde Detacker, and the president of another, and the vice president of the Oshai Foundation, which at the time was the largest philanthropy foundation in our community. But that's how it was brought to me. It was brought to me by the mayor. And when the mayor came to me and said that we are going to have Sam, all these years you've been fighting, all these years parents been screaming and hollering, trying to fight to make education better in our community. We got an answer for you. I'm telling you, Sam, this is a game changer. And so, like I told you, for those who heard this speech last year, it's really, this point is, as a parent leader who have constituents who listen to me, there was no way, no how I was going to buy into anything that the mayor said. Like I told you before, what it came down to is that the mayor is a politician and the mayor is a personal friend. I don't got nothing against the mayor. He's a personal friend. But my experience has taught me over the years that when politicians bring you something, that's too good to be true, it's usually too good to be true. And when he came and said, we have this game changer. Say Yes to Education is this process, is this way that we can have this college scholarship for every child in our region. We can ensure that every single child gets to go to college. Now, that sounds good. Nothing against the mayor. That sounds good. It's just coming from a politician. I didn't think that was, realistic. And so he, took us through the process. We started the meeting process. But then what happened is when the Say Yes team came to Buffalo, a few interesting things happened, to a point that Paul makes in his book. If you get a chance, please pick up his book. It's an outstanding example when he talked about the fact that you have to have, people at the table. One of the issues that we had as parents is that we did not have a seat at the table. And so Paul talks about the importance of cross-sector fluency. That's what he called it, cross-sector fluency. And what it means in a lot of ways is you gotta have people from different sectors at the table. That is what Say Yes did from the very beginning. When Say Yes came, they said, we have to have every key player from every sector at the community, from the community at the table, or we can't start this. It requires everybody. Now, for those who know the traditional history that kind of go on between unions and parent groups, and we had that traditional relationship. We did not get along with the union, and the union did not want us at the table. They did not want parents at the table because, again, you see what we were doing. We were holding protests. We were constantly, criticizing the process. And so they objected to us having a seat at the table. But because this process requires, in order for it to be effective, it requires everybody to be at the table. And so Say Yes created a seat for parents at the table where we hadn't had a seat before. So that gave me some encouragement, but the other part of it was they required everybody from every sector to have the key person at the table. Now, I believe genuinely that there was no way that was going to last. Remember, I told you we had tried that, like 2008, 2009 with Dr. Tishy came. He did a year worth of workshops. The first time he came, everybody was there. The mayor, the county executive, the state legislators, all the bank presidents, everybody was there. The second time he came, about 2/3 of them there. The third time he came, about a half of them was there. By the time he came, the last time, the fifth time, the last time he came, it was probably, not even a tenth of all the key people that were there at the table. So, my experience had taught me that, these people are not going to stay at the table. Say Yes had a requirement that everybody have to come to the table and they have to stay at the table and not just come to the table. They had to come to the table every 2 weeks, which I thought was for sure going to doom this process. But to jump ahead, essentially, it started to happen. People were coming to the table. They were coming every 2 weeks. But another thing that Paul talks about in his book, he talks about this principle of data conviction. One of the other requirements was that the city had to open up its books so that we could see where resources was at. The Buffalo Public School District had to open up its books. The county had to open up its books. And there was a partnership created where we went through and we looked at what the available resources for this initiative was, and we had the data. I mean, when I say the data, you know how school districts are. School districts do not like to share their data. That's just what they protective of their data. And in our case, they was really protective because the data was so bad. I mean, when I say the data was bad, this is what I mean. In Buffalo at that time, 28,000 of the 32,000 students were in failing schools. At that time in Buffalo, we only had 6 of the schools that were schools in good standing. All the rest of the schools were failing schools. And those were criteria-based schools. You had to get accepted into those schools. So we were in a situation where they did not want the data out there to show how poorly we was doing. So now we're in the Say Yes to Education process. In this process, and again, now I'm telling you, I'm going back 10 years ago. I want you to start this journey with me, thinking about where you are at today in the 20 county region. What's the current data? What's the graduation rate? We're not talking about one school district. We talk about 20 school districts. We talk about multiple counties. We talk about 2 states. So you have a lot of data. What is the data? What is this data conviction is a really important foundational point so we can know where we are starting at. I mean, this data should be data that we all care about. One of the critical points that took place with the Say Yes to Education process for me as a parent leader was that when we had this cross-sector fluency, we brought all these people together kind of with this data. We had higher education at the table. We had county government at the table. We had philanthropy at the table. We had businesses community at the table. We had all these different groups at the table. As a matter of fact, I may go to the next slide to kind of give people, go back to the slide before that. This is the people that we had at the table: city government, school board, community-based organizations, parents, philanthropy, professional associations, higher ed, everybody, unions, everybody was at the table. And with everybody at the table with the data, what we realized is we had a lot of people to what Paul would call, we had a lot of rebuilders at the table. Now, why was that most interesting to me as a parent leader? Because prior to that, the only people at the table were the union leaders. That's primarily who dominated the conversation. The union dominated the conversation. You also had people at the table from the school district, obviously the school district administration, you had the Board of Education, and you had parents. That's primarily who was at the table. You had some vendors at the table here and there, but those were the people that was in the conversation. And again, I go back to 1990 in this conversation. And all we were doing is kind of like spinning our wheels, having the same conversation over and over again, and nothing was changing. All of a sudden, when you had this cross-sector fluency, this cross-sector conversation going on, this collaborative governance process going on, you started seeing really smart people focusing on a problem in a way that up until now, it didn't happen. It's almost like before that, the only people who focused on the problem, they focused on it only in their self-interest. They weren't focused on how to necessarily solve the problem. The union was always talking about how to protect its interests. The administration was always trying to talk about how to protect its interests. We didn't have people talking about how to solve the problem. I gave a bunch of examples last year. I can give 1,000 more examples this year, but obviously the ones that matter the most to us are the ones that have a direct impact on parents. So we had issues, where, for example, parents didn't have after-school programs. We had at that time, we had supplemental education service programs. We didn't have after-school programs in every school. Only some schools had after-school programs. That was a huge issue. And even the schools that did have after-school programs, those schools that had after-school programs, they had them sometimes, some had them 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, some were 1 hour, 2 hours, but they were all essentially, different after-school programs. And in Buffalo, most of our kids are bused. So we have kids going, from the east side to South Buffalo and North Buffalo to school. So if you got kids going to 3 different parts of town to school, you got 3 kids going to 3 different schools, different kinds of after-school program just wasn't working. And there was nothing we could do about it for years. But at this Say Yes operating committee, because we really had this cross-sector conversation, we eventually came up with a process where we could have an after-school program in every school. We could have an after-school program that was uniform, 2 hours to 3 hours in every school every day. And that's just an example of what happened when we put everybody in the room. You had some real rebuilders in the room, people who were committed to solving the problem in the interest of everybody. We were able to do things that we weren't able to do up until that time. Go to the next slide. I want to talk about, the Say Yes operating committee, to me, was the key piece of what was going on. That's at the center. But let me talk about what the kind of things that fed into the Say Yes operating committee. We had work groups. The scholarship board is the key piece, and I'll let, Shelley, we'll do that in the Q&A, talk more about the scholarship model and how the scholarship board works. And it's important because it is the commitment device. Having this opportunity for every child to go to college matters. That is the thing that kind of holds this whole thing together. But it also matters in a community like Buffalo where you had, this oscillating graduation rate. It also matters that you have the wraparound support services that allow kids to be able to graduate from high school. Because it don't matter if you can go to college if you don't graduate from high school. In order to get those wraparound supports to work, you had to have other people at the table. You had to have a mental health task force. We had a teachers task force, a parent engagement task force, community-based organizations, post-secondary, we had legal service, religious leaders task force. So we literally had all these key task forces that were feeding other data, other information into the operating committee that allowed us to make a significant change. I can go and again talk about this forever. A lot of this, some of you heard last year, but let me kind of jump to what ultimately was the impact of this. Ultimately, after, and again, as I jump to the end of this, I don't want to give the impression that as easy as I'm saying it. This was a difficult process. In Buffalo, we went through 7 superintendents in 5 years. So we were going through superintendents. We were, going through challenges while this was going on. But we had this core group of rebuilders. We had this core operating committee that had a clear vision of coming up with a process where we can create a college-going culture or a post-secondary going culture where every single child who graduates gets to go to college. Not just the smart kids, not the kids just from certain neighborhoods, not just the kids who can afford it, but but everybody. That's what it resonated with me about what Shelley talked about in terms of the vision for the Innovia Foundation, because this is about everybody in the region thriving. So look at where we were at in 2011, and based on bringing Say Yes, partnering Say Yes, having Say Yes as an honest broker, look at where we are at in 2021. Go to the last slide. In 2021, now, when I came to you last year, we had progressively, and this is really important to note, we went from a 48% graduation rate in 2011, and then the next year, I think we went up to 52, then we went up to 54, then 55, and so we were incrementally moving along, and then by the time we got to last year, we had got to the highest graduation rate in our history. We got to a 65% graduation rate, which I reported to you. And as I wrap this up, let me tell you what has happened in last year. And this is really what I'm hoping you take away from this. We were faced with the challenges that everybody else in this country was faced with over this last year. And those challenges were challenges that if they would have happened to us in 2011, I cannot tell you where I think our community would have been. But when we got faced with the pandemic, because we had a Say Yes operating committee, because we had a group of people committed to the success of all of our kids, we had a process in place to have a conversation about, first of all, how we meet the needs of our community in the middle of the pandemic. So the food insecurity issue, we had that resolved. We were able to get food to people who normally got their food in school. We were able to get that working through community centers and churches. We were able to get people food. We were able to get students devices, making sure every child got a device. We were able to get internet access for every child. We had this community conversation going on because the Say Yes Operating Committee, as the core, was able to keep everybody together to focus on what was going on in the interest of everybody. Without that, could you imagine if we were in silos in 2020? When that pandemic came, what would have happened if we were in silos? I can't even tell you what would it look like. But because we were not in silos, because we had this place to operate from, we went from a graduation rate in 2019 of 65% to last year, our graduation rate jumped to 76%. That's what our graduation rate is right now, everybody. So I want you to think about this at a time when you would think we would actually take a step backwards. Because of the core group of rebuilders that have been there working together over the years, we were able to kind of brace ourselves, deal with the effects of the pandemic, and continue to thrive. So here's what I want to close with. I want to offer you this opportunity. Buffalo today is way better than it was in 2011. 10 years ago, if somebody asked me if it could look like this, I would have laughed, you know what I'm saying? Because again, I told you I was a skeptic. I didn't think it was possible. I want you to think about what the 20 county region can look like 10 years from now. I mean, there's no way what's going on in the 20 county region is as bad as it was in Buffalo. I want to suggest to you that if you consider Say Yes, if you consider a process where we're working on the success of everybody, we're working to make everybody thrive, and you consider bringing together your leadership councils and everybody committing, again, to Shelley's point, this is a bigger, bolder vision that you have. But all I want to say to you is it's possible. My Buffalo experiences tells me that it's possible. Nobody really could convince me that it was possible when in 2011, but I'm hoping that my experience can convince you that it's possible in 2021. So with that, I'm committed to this process. The way Paul would say it is I can't not do this. This is what I do. This is the thing that, fulfills my life purpose. So anything that I can do to be part of that process to support what's going on in Northern Washington, in Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho and the 20 county region, we are all in, and thank you. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity. Okay. So the most important part of, my son just told me to say, don't forget, go Zags.
Outstanding. Sam, thank you so much. What an incredible and inspiring message, a reminder how important this work is. And everybody, we're in the final stretch. So now is the time to think of all those questions that you have and start lighting up the chat box again. We're going to move into our final part of the morning, and that is our panel discussion with Shelley and Sam and Paul, three of the most inspirational leaders I know. And so as I'm waiting for a couple of great questions to jump in here, one of the really key questions, of course, Sam and Paul, for both of you, and this came up a number of times in that chat, is that idea that you both spoke of cross-sector influency. And actually, I'm looking at the three of you, and one of the greatest examples of cross-sector influency is Shelley and her background, her way of bringing together so many different people. How would the two of you advise us as a 20-county region to build out that kind of cross-sector influency to launch something as big and as bold and as audacious as Say Yes across 20 counties? Could you speak to that a little bit more? And Sam, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, start with Paul, because let him kind of talk about in his language, then I'll pick up after that.
Okay. So first of all, it's cross-sector fluency. But I think I might like cross-sector influence even better. You just gave me a new term there. I like that a lot. So here's what's fascinating. So just a quick definition of it. The word fluency is on there because we've had lots of people over the years that, would pop in and out of sectors and sort of episodically, transactionally sort of jump across sectors. I mean, more people that genuinely are fluent, like I assume Sam and Shelley, across these three sectors, and they sort of move fluidly in and out of them. They're so critical. As far as developing it, the interesting thing about this is, of all the 5 traits I talk about, it's probably the one you can most consciously, intentionally develop by literally creating the opportunities for people to cross over sectors, creating the tables for people to come together that bring together different sectors. People can intentionally try to do this. And then the other thing I would say is, and Sam referenced this a little bit, when you do get them to the table, having somebody in the room that's got that generosity mindset, I'm not trying to be corny here, you need to have people somebody at the table that understands how to bring all those people together. And sometimes it's a cross-sector fluent person. Sometimes it's somebody that has that generosity mindset. So when you convene people, you've also got to make sure you got the right people at the table, not just the names and the titles, but the people that can play the right roles to bring them together.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, again, now I'm talking about my understanding of it after the fact. I've heard of collective impact and collaborative governance, those terms, but really, what it's about is having everybody at the same table with a commitment to the same outcome. So that's really what it came down to us, people who, and then, I don't necessarily even think it's necessary that people believe it's possible, but I do think people have to want it to happen. They have to at least be committed to, I don't think it's possible, but I would love for it to happen anyway, and I think that's the key, making that table, getting everybody to the table. And, again, in a 20 county region, you working uphill, that's hard work. I know how hard it was just in one county, even when a county was one city, it was hard work. But because people wanted that outcome, it really, in the end, was worth every minute of the hard work that we took to get where we are today.
Erin, I'm going to jump in here because I've been watching the chat as Sam was speaking, and there's a couple points I want to make. One, we're not going to answer every single question you have today on the technical side of Say Yes. Our hope was that we could inspire you to want to learn more, and we will have a follow-up session so that we can dive deep. And you'll actually receive a survey in the email that goes out to you after our meeting today, where you can actually say, yes, I want to learn more and I want to be engaged with Say Yes education. We know we have great schools. So we're different from Buffalo in that way. They had a challenge that they were facing, that their school system was struggling. We know that in our region, we have great schools, challenged, especially on the Idaho side when it comes to funding. But we do believe that education is actually, will have a transformational impact on not just the youth in our region, but actually our entire communities. At the end of the day, Say Yes education is an economic development driver. It builds your workforce. As we look at the one benefit I would say that that COVID has brought us is we understand that we can work from anywhere. So it actually allows us to, even in our rural communities where we may not necessarily see the jobs, build our workforce. There's a little asterisk there. We understand broadband. There's a session on that coming up later in a couple of months. So I want to throw that out there to say, yes, this is a big, hairy, audacious goal. 750,000 of our million people in our region live in two counties, Kootenai County and Spokane County. We are not going to leave our rural counties behind. So for us, we are committed to those other 18 counties in our 20 county region. It is critically important for economic development in the rural communities as much as is in Spokane and Coeur d'Alene. So kick it back to you, Aaron. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Shelley. Hey, Sam, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. This was a question that got texted to me by one of our Leadership Council members, and building off of Paul's theme of rebuilders. Tell us a story of a rebuilder in the Say Yes to Buffalo story, someone who was courageous, worked together, that you look back on now and realize the impact that they had that has led to your success. Is there something that comes to mind for you?
Oh, no question about it. David Russ, who ultimately became the executive director of Say Yes to Education. David Russ was on the original operating committee. He represented the youth department from the county. But you know, the process of getting people to work together is a very difficult process. Everybody in Buffalo essentially is coming from their own silo. So you either was union-centric, parent-centric, business-centric, board-centric, politics-centric, you know, to get somebody who had the ability to kind of move between all those sectors and kind of keep us together. And he was doing that even before he became the executive director. He was doing that just as a member of the operating committee. And so he surfaced as somebody we could all trust. He surfaced as somebody who was so committed to the goal that he didn't get caught up into the tit for tat that went on, you know, when we dealt with our disagreement. He kept refocusing us toward the goal. And so when it came an opportunity when we had to hire somebody to lead this organization locally, because initially we were working with national consultants, he was the obvious choice, and he was he was a difference maker. And if you go look at where it's at today, look at the staff he has hired. It's the most diverse staff of any staff in our region. It's really a progressive person. Part of what Paul talked about is the right person matters. In this particular case, he was the right person.
Great. Thank you, Sam. And then Paul, a question for you on this, building on that rebuilders theme, and then we're going to get to a couple of the other great questions here in the chat. When you hear all of this, Paul, and think about the way you've thought about leadership in communities and in a region like ours, how would a rebuilder think about a launch of something as big and audacious as Say Yes to Education?
Number one, Mr. Radford's given us a pretty good roadmap. I guess what I would say is, it's interesting for me to listen to how Sam thinks about my book in relation to his work. It's almost like Sam's got this awesome macro view vision, and what I sort of brought to it is this a little more micro, individual human level view, and it's sort of like bringing those two things together. So Sam said, like early on, Sam said at the start, we had the right vision, or we had some of the right people. We just didn't have all the right parts put together. So I think the way to sort of join these two things together is he's got a vision, he's got results. And I truly believe in those 5 traits. I have seen so many things fail because you don't have enough women in the room. You don't have the generosity mindset person in the room. It's literally making sure you got not just the right titles and organizations at the table, but the right kind of people and the right kind of leaders. So I think there's actually a very tangible way to apply it. Do we have the 5 kinds of people at the table to go along with the right vision?
Right. Thanks, Paul. We got a great question from Paul Reed, who is the publisher of our local Journal of Business and an incredible leader in our community. And a spot on question here. Maybe we'll start with you, Sam, on this one, and then Shelley and Paul jump in. Because education is such a catalyst for other societal change, how, Sam, starting with you, how did progress in schools in Buffalo impact non-educational indicators in your community? And then Shelley and Paul, maybe you can jump on that and speak to that also from your sense about leadership and change in communities. But Sam, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. You know, because of the shortness of time, there's just no real way to kind of talk about the in-depth change that has taken place in Buffalo. So let me just say it this way, right? When I told you we had 28,000 out of 32,000 kids that were failing schools, all right? That we only had 6 schools that were in good standing. Now, all of our schools are in good standing except 3. You know what I'm saying? Except 3. We have made that kind of change, right? And so to think about that, we went from a community that, in my opinion, was hopeless. I mean, if you couldn't go to college, I mean, most people didn't go to college. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And so we switched to a community that was hopeless in terms of the possibilities of the future to now to a community that's hopeful, to where people are really genuinely inspired by the fact that they have an opportunity to go to college scholarship already taken care of. And just that, and you feel it, and I shared last year, you know, you feel it in places like the barbershop, you feel it in places like church, where people are talking about the opportunity for kids to go to college, because we know they all got the opportunity to go to college. People are asking, what college are you going to? Because they know this opportunity is there for everybody. So this is not just something that is affecting us in the education sector. This really spills over into every sector. It spills over into every aspect of life, because now you have an opportunity. Everybody has the opportunity in a way that it wasn't there before.
Sam, do you have the data around the foster care placement? One of the major impacts in Buffalo was the significant reduction in foster care placements in your community.
Pull up the slide, while you talk about it, he'll pull up the slide for you.
So, Paul, you're absolutely right. Education impacts everything. I mean, there's data that shows that, you know, that increased education in a community decreases crime rates, increases the median wage. I mean, it makes sense, right? You're building your skilled workforce, you're investing in your youth. There is a significant amount of data out there that shows the impact of increased education on a community. I'll
add a quick point, and while Sam's pulling his slide up, of all the 5 traits that I put in there, data conviction, it's kind of the driest. I mean, like, I hesitated, like, it's just not that like sexy, right? And yet again and again and again, if there's not data in the equation, number one, you just don't have a chance. And then number 2, I'm sure Sam can speak to this way better than I can. Data can be dangerous and data can be awesome, right? We got to take data, we got to disaggregate it. We got to break it down. We got to make sure the data isn't biased. So data is absolutely necessary. It is utterly insufficient if it's not the right kind of data and used in the right way. So not sexy. I like the chat, make it sexy again, but absolutely vital in the equation.
Well, also with the right people. See, when you have the right people at the table, they take that data and they make that data, they make sure it's the right data. Otherwise, because you can use data to say whatever you want to say sometimes, right? So that's also what goes with having the right people. I don't see he has that slide, but our foster care placement went up. I mean, one of the major impacts was the decrease in the number of kids who were going into foster care as a result of a lot of the work that was going on with in the school building with the family specialists. We had a family partner in every school who now were working directly with families. And so some of those issues that would end up in the family court, some of those issues didn't end up in the family court. Some of those issues were dealt with right in the school. I mean, we got mental health clinics in school. We got, all kind of issues that were dealt with in the silos. Now, some of those things came right into the schools, and we began to work with families, partner with families. And again, if I start giving examples, I can give examples all day about how partnering with families in the school before something, blew up into a much bigger problem was a game changer, and it prevented kids from going into detention, prevented kids from going on pens, prevented kids from going into foster care. It really did the things that ultimately, make us stronger as a community.
If you haven't picked up on it, so much of this work is about realigning existing resources so that they're working together and they're not operating in those silos.
One of the questions in the chat box here is, what is the infrastructure we need in place to get started with something like Say Yes across a region as diverse and vast as ours is? 2 states, 20 counties. How many districts is? I think there's over 100 school districts. Sam, maybe you can speak to that. Shelley, I know we've talked quite a bit about some of that at a high level. Let's talk about infrastructure.
Again, so I mean, yeah, let Shelley go ahead, Shelley.
I was just going to jump in and say that we have a great model, the Say Yes model, which is data-driven, based on policy change, based on realigning resources. And as you saw in that puzzle piece and with the coordinating council, that it involves all sectors of a community. Now, what we need to do is when we take that from this, one district, one urban community model and develop it out to our 20 county regions, we recognize that we can't do this alone. Have we said that over and over again? Actually, in everything that we do, that we cannot do this alone. We need all of you, because we're not going to have just one committee. There's going to be regional committees. There's going to be community committees. It's going to be people in the rebuilders. I put this in the chat box. It's going to take the rebuilders in your community that will come alongside us and partner, that believe, or at least, as Sam said, want to see this vision happen in our region and in your community. So we need all of you to join us in this work.
All I would say is ditto. I mean, what you've seen there in those videos was just the infrastructure scaled up. I mean, ultimately, you're just scaling that up. And again, I think it's no question about the fact that it's hard, but it was hard to get it done at the city level. I mean, I'm not going to suggest that it wasn't. It was easy anyway, but you've seen there's a lot of moving parts in there. I think one of the critical pieces was that Community Leadership Council, because now you got community leaders who have a dashboard, who are constantly informed and in the process of what's going on. So I just want to say that what Shelley shared is really the way, but it's a lot involved. It's not an easy task, to say the least.
Great. We're getting so many great questions in the chat box about how do you get people to the table? How do you keep people at the table, whether it's union leaders or other groups? How do you push through the resistance? Maybe Sam and Shelley, would you speak to the way that the scholarship has a way of keeping people at the table?
Sam, do you want to?
Shelley? Okay. Yeah, so I'll be straight out forward with you. We had one of our superintendents. I told you we had 7 of them in 5 years, right? One of them, had an issue with sharing the data, and because ultimately the scholarship is really something that no superintendent wants to see go away. Essentially, when it came down to if you didn't do all the things that needed to be done, you had the scholarship, and the scholarship board is a separate board. They ultimately have the ability to, anytime they choose to walk away with those scholarships. And let me just say that scholarship is, when we did it in Buffalo, it was really about 20 years, being able to have everybody go to post-secondary opportunities for 20 years. Now we are working on Say Yes Forever. Now we in the process of making that be in perpetuity. So that scholarship really is something that holds people accountable, to ensure that, everybody kind of stays at the table playing fair in order to make sure that we continue to advance as a community.
Sam, I think you did a great job explaining it. It really, the scholarship serves as both the carrot and the stick. It's the incentive for folks to want to participate, but it also, as Sam said, keeps people at the table, because which school district doesn't want their students to have access to the scholarship program, right? Do you want to be that superintendent that's facing parents that want to know why their community or their school's not be able to participate? So it really does serve as, hopefully, what I would say is a positive driver for change, with that little bit of extra encouragement.
Awesome, thanks. We're getting so many great questions about Say Yes. I just want to make a note here that this will be, as Shelley already mentioned, the last of our conversations. We are going to come back to Say Yes, so there will be lots of time. We're going to capture all these great questions. Thank you, everyone. We've got time for 2 more quick questions before we wrap here. Shelley, we've got a question for you. And I'm going to add my context to it at first, but you've been Innovia's champion with your passion for our region, for vibrant and sustainable communities where every person can thrive. What is that, beyond just Say Yes, what does that look like for you in the coming years? What dreams and visions do you have for our 20-county region?
So I was going to say, we just touched on our big, hairy, audacious goal and vision for our region. I'm going to tee up because of time, just the fact that we have this phenomenal goal around a 5% transfer of wealth in our region. We completed a transfer of wealth study that shows that $42 billion will transfer generationally in the next 10 years in our 20-county region, 42 billion. So if just 5% of that wealth transfer were directed back to community, that's $2 billion to our region. So anyone here who thinks, wow, how do you develop a scholarship for your entire region? We can't do it. We don't have enough resources here. Well, we want to change that narrative. We want to change the narrative to one of hope and abundance. Because with $42 billion transferring generationally in our region, that's in our region in the next 10 years, we know that it exists. So we're launching a 5% campaign to change that culture around the way people give and around generosity, to say, just give 5% back to the community you live in, work in, and love. Join us for our session on April 14th to deep dive into that 5% campaign and how it has transformed communities around our country.
Outstanding. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Sam. You've inspired us. Everyone, we are so grateful to have all of you with us today. If you've got questions, follow-up feedback for us, we would welcome it. We will be inviting you to our upcoming discussions that we've already mentioned, and we look forward to seeing you there. Shelley, I'll let you have the final word, but as we close out and as folks jump away, we're going to share a music video from a song that was written exclusively for Innovia as a part of our annual reception this past fall, called This Is Why, written and performed by our local Carly Ingersoll, who's a singer-songwriter right here in our community. That's how we'll close out as folks are jumping away. And Shelley, I'll give you the final word.
My final word is this, and I said it earlier, is that at Innovia Foundation, we believe that the power of generosity can make the impossible possible. And we invite you to join us in our work to transform the lives and communities of those in our region. Thank you for joining us today.
She didn't have much, just some inspiration, enough to give something back. Now a million lives and generations, young minds now back on track. Some have lost their homes, no food on the table at the end of their road. It's the hardest year anyone can remember, but we aren't left without hope. This is why we can stand right here. We can give so much to a world full of fear. There is someone who isn't out of hope. but I need you now to stand for your neighbor. We can make change that lasts. Turn on the light, there's nowhere fear can hide, and I'm here for you now. So much at stake, so many feel like they could break, but I'm here for you now. This is why we can stand right here. We can give so much to a world full of fear. Now there's someone who isn't out of hope. We can make it through the lowest of the lows.
Thank you, everyone. For those of you still on, we're glad you are with us. If you have further questions, Shelley and I and others are going to stay on. You can use the chat box or you can just jump in, but we're really grateful for everyone for joining us today for our 2021 Leadership Summit. Thank you so much.
I think I'm gonna jump off.
Yep.
I mean, you gotta stay.
Shelley and Aaron, that was excellent. Who would have thought that something as impactful as last year's leadership conference could happen virtually? A lot of great thought went into this. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. It's always interesting trying to pull the same thing off in a virtual setting, but you know, when you have some really great leaders that have a message for us that can inspire us, it can work. So I know there's still some folks on. We are literally here just to see if there's, you know, if you have some questions for us or want to engage in conversation, feel free. Otherwise, you're welcome to go and have a wonderful day. We're just here for you. Are Sam and Paul still on?
Yes, Sam's still on.
Great.
I just want to say you guys did a phenomenal job, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You really played well off of each other.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box. If folks want to ask a question, you're welcome to just unmute and ask anything. And again, thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Oh, we've got a question about Sam's slide. Yes, we can absolutely share out some of those slides that provide some of that context for why the Say Yes model is so comprehensive and the secret sauce of what makes it work. So we can absolutely share those out. And again, as we shared in our September session, we'll come back to closing the opportunity gap and take a deeper dive into Say Yes. So thanks for that great question, Beth.
And Hannah asked a question about who to connect with on becoming involved in Say Yes. Please reach out to Meg Lindsay, our education director, or any of us actually at Innovia, and you will also receive an email from us as a follow-up to the summit where you can indicate your support and we can reach out to you. So thanks, Hannah, for wanting to be involved. Would love to have you participating. And Meg did put her email in the chat box for everyone.
All right.
Okay.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great day. If there aren't any other questions, then we will say farewell.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.